If we can all agree that freedom is really important, and it's really important to guarantee each other's freedoms, that we really believe that we could have greater happiness as a society. If we were united, society would be a better place. If we internalize the idea that the denial of one person's freedom affects all of us negatively, and we approached our voting, our creation of public policy, our personal behavior with the intent of maximizing everybody else's freedom, and we were united in that effort, I think that's a good goal to aim for. I think that's the goal that people like Thomas Jefferson were aiming for. But to be honest, I'm not really into politics, and I'm certainly not endorsing any particular party or candidate. But I think it's important to talk about it and to have an open dialogue about this and to make sure that we learn from the past and never forget about really bad examples from history where freedoms were forfeited, and that we remember that so that we don't repeat those mistakes. Hey, it's Hazlett in my closet studio. I want to talk about something that we don't really talk much about these days, at least not in Canada, and that is freedom. I think one of the reasons we don't talk about it very much in Canada is that we enjoy pretty significant personal freedoms. You know, we're a wealthy country for the most part, and most people in Canada are really quite free and enjoy great liberty. I think that freedom is a topic that should be discussed. It should be discussed regularly, because if you're not very careful about your freedoms, you can lose them. They're something that you can give away without realizing you've done it. So I think it's really important just to have discussion about it and to be aware, and especially to weigh the costs when we look at giving up freedom, giving up personal freedoms in the name of an ideology. Freedom to go where they want, to say what they want, to interact with the people they want to interact with, the freedom to improve their situation. And so when you're not facing a lot of oppression, then there's not rebellion. Also, speaking very loudly about freedom is very American, and Canadians love to distinguish ourselves from our neighbors to the south. They don't really care. They think we're that funny little brother who does cute things, you know, sometimes they laugh at. But we're the little brother, and so we're indignant and try to show how we are also so very important. Anyways, I don't really care. I have lots of American family, and I generally love Americans, and they're very entertaining in a lot of ways. So what does it mean to be free, really? Like, what is freedom? What does this mean? So I think absolute freedom would be the ability to go wherever you want to go, to do whatever you want to do, to believe whatever you want to believe, to fill in the blank whatever you want to do. That would be absolute freedom. But of course, if I have absolute freedom, that would include me. If I wanted to go and live in your house and kick you out, then I would be free to do it. That would be absolute freedom. But my absolute freedom would interfere with your freedoms for quiet enjoyment of your property. And of course, in the extreme example, if somebody kills another person, they're taking away that person's freedom to be alive. And so in order to maximize the freedom of individuals in society, everyone has to have limits on their freedom. There's some optimal formula for maximizing most of the freedoms of most of the people. There's some optimal formula of limiting just enough personal freedoms to guarantee the maximum freedom for everybody in society as a whole. So the libertarian view is, I think, and if I'm wrong, correct me, is that we as a society should limit the least amount of freedom as possible in order to guarantee the most freedom possible. And this extends to taxation and everything, that government should be as small as possible to provide only the necessary services, providing things like a military that is able to defend the country's sovereignty so that the country can remain free, to employ a police force that enforces the laws that guarantee everyone's freedom, this type of thing. You know, when libertarians start talking, people start freaking out because they're afraid that we won't have any roads anymore or something, or schools, or it's going to be a really expensive society to live in. I don't think that's the case, but I'm not a political scientist, and I don't know how all those little things would work out. I'm sure they would. If you think about all the money that we pay in taxes here in Canada, if we had those resources in our own bank accounts and were able to spend them as we wanted to, then I'm sure that wealth would still get distributed around, probably in a more efficient manner, because the government is the least efficient body that I'm aware of, and I've worked in the government. They're a huge bloated beast, totally non-agile and wasteful. They are not the best manager of assets, and anybody who's worked in government will tell you that, and if they don't, they're lying to themselves and to you. So, but what about the poor? Because if you're poor, your freedom is severely limited. You can only do so much. If you're struggling to make ends meet and all your time is spent on trying to figure out where your next meal is coming from and to find a warm place to sleep, then you're not really free. People's freedoms can be severely limited by lack of resources. So what do we do about that? Well, in recent history, generally the approach has been easy. Let's tax the rich and give it to the poor. That's oversimplification, but that's generally the idea. Tax is an impingement on freedom. And what I mean by that is when the government taxes you, that's taking away your freedom to do what you want with that money. So that's clearly restricting your freedom. And I think it's a really poor trade-off, generally speaking, because, as I mentioned, the government's a terrible manager of assets. The government is definitely not the best steward of resources. I'm not anarchist. I think government is really important, and I think it's important to have a good, strong government that is empowered to do the things it needs to do and that's ethical. But living in a country with a bloated government, I can tell you that the pendulum only seems to swing one way, and that is the government just keeps getting bigger. I've never heard of taxes going down. They're always going up. And trying to solve problems with taxes is really trying to force people to do the right thing, right? What we're saying is, I don't think rich people are going to do the right thing with their assets, with their resources. So we need to take it away from them so we can do what we know is the right thing with those resources. That's really what taxation is saying. It's saying, we're going to force you to do the right thing because we don't think you're really going to do it. Maybe there's good reason for that. Maybe people won't do the right thing. I don't know. But that's what's happening. Of course, the extreme example is communism, where there's no private property, there's no private ownership. Everybody owns everything. And so there's no poor because everybody has and nobody wants for anything. Everybody shares all of the resources. Of course, in practice, this doesn't seem to have worked very well because then all the power ends up in the hands of the government. Also, it was enforced by police states and brutality. And you had this great centralization of power in the hands of the government, and where there's great power, there's corruption. And so it's, didn't work out. But I think the biggest problem with the communist model is that it was foisted upon people. So what I mean by that is the concept of sharing all of the resources so there's no poor, and even there's no poor, no rich. There's nothing wrong with that. I think that's utopian and something to strive for, but only by choice, only where people have the freedom to choose that and decide, that is what I want. I'm going to share my resources. It would have to be totally voluntary. The moment you start enforcing that type of an ideology, then you're simply forcing people against their will to do what you think is the right thing, and that is a total violation of freedom. So look, I'm not a political scientist. I'm not an expert on this stuff. I'm just kind of shooting from the hip about something that, based on my personal experience living in Western Canada. I don't know what the perfect system would be. Maybe we already have the perfect system based on the societies we live in. I don't know that there would be one that would work any better than our current one does. And our current one honestly works pretty good here in Canada. It's not perfect, but I enjoy great freedom as a Canadian citizen, and so I don't really have much to complain about. What I am saying is that if we can all agree that freedom is really important, and it's really important to guarantee each other's freedoms, that we really believe that we could have greater happiness as a society. If we were united, society would be a better place. If we internalize the idea that the denial of one person's freedom affects all of us negatively, and we approached our voting, our creation of public policy, our personal behavior with the intent of maximizing everybody else's freedom, and we were united in that effort, I think that's a good goal to aim for. I think that's the goal that people like Thomas Jefferson were aiming for. But to be honest, I'm not really into politics, and I'm certainly not endorsing any particular party or candidate. But I think it's important to talk about it and to have an open dialogue about this, and to make sure that we learn from the past and never forget about really bad examples from history where freedoms were forfeited, and that we remember that so that we don't repeat those mistakes. Think about Europe in general throughout the Middle Ages, where oppression was so significant on the poor population that there was revolution, that people fled the continent in droves to come to a land where freedom was guaranteed. Think of Europe in more recent history. Dictators like Hitler, Stalin, Mussolini, Franco, and others. If we learn and think about the dangerous ideologies that gave birth to the great oppressions that we saw in the 20th century, we learn to recognize the hallmarks of those types of ideologies that serve to take away people's freedoms under a banner of some greater good. If we learn and think about the concepts and ideologies that those leaders espoused in order to consolidate power, then perhaps we can recognize it the next time somebody tries to do that and prevent it from ever happening again. And so looking for those small impingements on freedom and to prevent them from becoming bigger, I think is important. So I hope we can talk about it in a respectful way. That's my 2 bits. What do you think? Am I totally out of it? Do these ideas sound scary or radical to you? Do you agree with me? Do you want to add something? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching. If you want to see more content like this, like the video. And of course, if you want to be notified anytime I upload more content, subscribe. See you later. Fake freedom flows from your face. Kicking, screaming.
trying to say.